Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. David was on the way out, literally and figuratively. He was being forced to flee Jerusalem because of the coup his own son had staged. But he was also on the way out as the king of Israel. The days of his reign had come to an abrupt and ignominious end. As he made his way out of the city, he was barefoot and in mourning. Gone were the trappings of his kingship. Now he was just another citizen, submitting himself to the usurper to his throne, his own son, Absalom. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 14, David will have yet another painful reminder of his dramatic fall from grace. On his way out of the city, he's accosted by a man, a relative of Saul, who saw David's fall as just and well-deserved. David was simply getting what he deserved for having taken the crown from Saul. But David refused to allow this man's words and actions to get to him. He was going to trust God, regardless of the circumstances. It seems that with each step David took, the news got worse. All he was trying to do was leave the city in peace, but before he could get past the summit of the Mount of Olives, yet another individual shows up with bad news. Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, arrived with a couple of donkeys loaded down with supplies. When David asked Ziba why he was there, he explained that Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan and grandson of Saul, had decided to align himself with Absalom in hopes of getting back what was rightfully his as an heir of the former king. Ziba's news had to have stung David deeply, because he had shown great mercy and love to Mephibosheth, allowing him to live in his palace and eat at his table. He had kept a vow he had made to Mephibosheth's father, and now Mephibosheth was returning the favor with betrayal. But later on in the story, we'll discover that Ziba had been lying. When David eventually returned to Jerusalem, Mephibosheth would be one of the first ones to greet him, and he explained to David what really happened that day. Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. "Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?" the king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, "My lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, 'Saddle my donkey so I can go with the king,' for as you know I am crippled. Ziba has slandered me by saying that I refused to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do what you think is best." 2 Samuel 19, verses 24 through 27. But when Ziba showed up that day, it was impossible for David to know what was really going on, and at that point, David would not have been surprised by anything he heard. That Mephibosheth might have decided to betray him was not shocking news to David. He took it in stride and determined to reward Ziba for his kindness by giving him all that belonged to Mephibosheth. Of course, this reward would remain unclaimed by Ziba as long as David remained in exile and Absalom was on the throne. The next thing that happened to David was even more disconcerting and disturbing. As he and his retinue continued their escape, they passed by the town of Baharim, where a man came out and began to verbally assault David, cursing him and accusing him of being a man of bloodshed. As David went on his way, this man followed, spewing his words of anger and resentment and throwing stones at the former king. Shimei, it seems, was related to Saul, and he had some long-held resentment toward David for having replaced Saul as the king of Israel. He even seems to blame David for Saul's death, as well as that of Abner and Jonathan. His accusation that David was a man of bloodshed was another statement that had to have hit David hard. While David knew he had played no part in the deaths of Saul, Jonathan, or Abner, he would have been reminded of his role in the death of Uriah. It's likely that he recalled his refusal to deal with the actions of his own son Amnon, which eventually led to Amnon's murder by Absalom. David was a man of bloodshed. He knew it well, and lived with the knowledge of that fact each and every day of his life. And while he had been forgiven by God, he would never forget the events of his life that had led to the discipline of God. Even now, David could not be sure whether all this was yet another demonstration of God's displeasure with him. The words of Shimei had to have hit David hard. "Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel," he shouted at David. "The Lord is paying you back for all the bloodshed in Saul's clan. You stole his throne, and now the Lord has given it to your son Absalom. At last you will taste some of your own medicine, for you are a murderer." 2 Samuel 16, verses 7 through 8. David was dazed and confused. He was reeling from the rapid-fire series of events that had left him without a throne and on his way into exile yet again in his life. What had happened? How did everything fall apart so quickly and unexpectedly? What was God doing? And what had David done to deserve it? There are moments in all of our lives when we question what God may be up to. We struggle with understanding the nature of the events surrounding our life and almost immediately begin to wonder what we have done to make God angry with us. We tend to see the presence of disorder or disaster in our lives as a sign of God's displeasure with us. And David would have felt the same way. He was unsure of the cause of these events, but almost automatically assumed it had something to do with him and was the result of something he had done. He was trying to trust God, but it was difficult. Wave after wave of bad news engulfed him, leaving him reeling and wondering what he had done to deserve this fate. When we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, there will always be well-meaning friends who step in to give us advice. In their effort to ease our pain, they'll say things meant to encourage and comfort us, but so often their words will lack scriptural backing or the authority of God. Abishai, out of love for David, offered to silence Shimei by cutting off his head. While that would have done the trick, David refused, saying, "If the Lord has told him to curse me, who are you to stop him?" 2 Samuel 16, verse 10. David was not willing to commit further bloodshed in an effort to eliminate this discomfort in his life. If it was God ordained, then there was nothing to be done. He went on to tell Abishai and all those with him, "My own son is trying to kill me. Doesn't this relative of Saul have even more reason to do so? Leave him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to do it. And perhaps the Lord will see that I am being wronged, and will bless me because of these curses today." 2 Samuel 16, verses 11 through 12. It's so easy to believe that the removal of the discomfort in our lives will solve our problem. We can so easily convince ourselves that the elimination of whatever is bothering us is the key to restoring our joy and contentment. But David knew that his hope was in the Lord. Killing Shimei would not resolve his problem. Silencing the words of an angry man would not make David's life any better or easier. Only God could bring peace in the midst of the chaos and restore David's joy. David had a strong belief that all things come from the hand of the Lord. He believed in the sovereignty and providence of God. Like Job, David lived by the mantra, "Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" Job 2, verse 10. David was dazed. He was confused. But he was confident that God was in control. He may not have fully understood why these things were happening, but he was fully assured that God knew. And in time, God would make his will in all of these things plain to David.